Tony?
Thank you.
Please. Gentlemen, it's really a pleasure today to be all together, and I have to say it's a unique panel session that we are having together. Not only because 6 years ago the Port of Hamburg and the Port of Los Angeles created the Chain Port Group, which is represented here at the Smart Port again. And we have here also Frans van Dolen, who has been very much engaged in the IMO negotiation for the cybersecurity guidelines of IAPH. But not only, what is also important is from the work that we have collectively been doing with our 22 experts around the world, for the last year and a half. Now US Coast Guard is with us on collaboration and discussing about the way forward. And we have been discussing in the previous session about 23, what do we do in 23, our subject matter going to be about cybersecurity, the way forward. And I'm going to maybe start by, something very important to the non-IT specialists that we have around the table. Jens, what is, for non-specialists, what should be a pragmatic strategy to fight a cyber attack?
Yeah, first of all, top management attention, as we wrote down also in our guidelines, it is very important. Cyber security is not just the case for the IT departments. It has to be located also at the top management level. And to make that a little bit more transparent, if you allow, is I would like to share to all the listeners and TV watchers a concrete strategic approach how the attackers work today, and it's easy to defend. And right now the attackers, they use external partners in the port, working in the central operation centers with emulations, and they have, as you all know, a username and a password. And this kind of credentials you can find in the darknet right now with tools distributed by, let's call them attackers. And everybody is familiar when you use Microsoft at home or a online banking software that you have a two-factor authentication. That's normal for most of us. And in big companies, sometimes only an amount of $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 avoids them, the operating centers, from the two-factor authentication or three-factor authentication to get into the mainframe system or server systems. And this kind of attacks has happened during the last 4 weeks, I would say more than 100 times. We saw that in energy supply areas, metal and mining industry, but also all governmental areas. And so my big announcement today is, please check in your own organization, is there still minimum a two-factor authentication also in your central mainframe systems or server farms? That's what I wanted to share at the first.
So that's really a good kickoff of the discussion, right, Jens? So now let's go back, Frans, on the cybersecurity guidelines. You achieved collectively with the group a fantastic effort with the IMO, different FAL and MSC committee, so that now it has been endorsed by IMO as far as the guidelines are concerned. But now next is implementation. Where do we stand on implementation of the guidelines?
Yeah, thank you, Pascal. Maybe a few words about IMO, where our guidelines did go through an endorsement process within IMO. It passed Maritime Security Committee and Facilitation Committee. And the guidelines are now listed in a very important document together with other industry guidelines and have become authoritative in a certain sense. They give us an objectivized framework how to deal with cybersecurity in ports and port facilities. This is not without legal significance because when there is a cyber incident, a lot of questions will be posed to the entity by the shareholder, the commissioner, the competent authorities, other agencies, etc., clients, not in the least, and it has to be explained what has been done in order to prevent such an incident. And then the guidelines come in, they are grown up, and this is really a framework where you have to be active with, and you have to explain what you have done in the case of such an incident. The same goes if there are legal implications, if you are in the legal aftermath of a cyber incident, engaged in a legal process by those who suffer damage, then also you have to explain what you have done in the prevention in order to get away from a cyber incident. And there also, this objectivized framework of our guidelines are very important. So yes, Pascal, we are now coming into the phase of implementation, and there we have to learn from each other, but not only that, we also have to think about a very structured program in order to help those entities who want to implement these guidelines.
Thank you, really, Frans. Tom, from a US Coast Guard perspective, when it's come to, for example, implementation of cybersecurity strategies and guidelines around the globe, you focus on information sharing as a key element to start with, right?
We do, thank you. So we take a two-pronged approach towards information sharing, both internationally, and this was born out of a cyber symposium that we hosted with 25 other countries back in May in LA that developed a working group comprised of these countries. And that working group will focus on information sharing best practices, how to work together to advance legislation policy internationally through the IMO, through other groups. We also look at it from a domestic aspect as well. So information sharing, we like to start at the very nexus of port security, in our ports, with our port stakeholders. Through our captain of the port, U.S. Coast Guard captain of the port that oversees security and operations in our ports. We work with area maritime security committees. We bring in all the stakeholders for monthly meetings. We discuss physical security, ISPIS code implementation, maritime transportation security agreement, MITSA, and we also talk about cyber. So the people that are going to be the first connectivity to a cyber threat are going to be in the ports. They're going to be the port operators. They're going to be the captain of the port. So it's vital that we work together. We develop a strong cyber hygiene to identify cyber threats as soon as possible, to practice mitigation measures, to practice this within the port so everyone understands the threat and can work together to increase the cyber resiliency in the port. It's an ongoing effort, but it's something that the Coast Guard, under our Commandant's cybersecurity strategy, is committed. We've added additional manpower, both on the military side and on the civilian side, where we have cybersecurity specialists that work in those port areas. So they're that connectivity between the maritime domain and with the Coast Guard, up to headquarters, where we work policy and we work to implement that policy so it's actionable.
So information sharing, really, Frans, was part of the guidelines of IAPH and now of the IMO framework. Tony, in LA, you launched about a year ago, that was in December, the first ever its kind, I have to say, a Cyber Resilience Center, that lots of people have been looking at it recently. What is the lesson learned from the implementation of the CRC, especially the base of the CRC is information sharing, right? Between the stakeholders, public and private, correct?
Yes. First of all, thank you. Glad to be here. I would like to share a little background before we go into the lessons learned, so everybody can understand how the CRC was established. Back in 2017, when MERS was under a cyber attack, our executive director came into our cybersecurity operations center and asked if we had any visibility into the cyber attack. And I remember telling him no. So in 2014, our port established the Cybersecurity Operations Center to focus on the protection of our digital and data infrastructure. And then in the aftermath of the MERS incident, our organization wanted to better address and manage cybersecurity from a ecosystems perspective, which is to protect, in attempt to protect the LA's stakeholders. So the concept of the CRC was established. So the CRC is basically a system of systems that was designed to be an early detection and prevention system for the stakeholders so they can be prepared for the next cyber attack. It is an information sharing platform that the participants can provide security information and events weekly or on demand, so they can continue utilizing this platform and build that relationship. So when the pandemic hit in 2019-2020, we had a setback of getting this project off the ground. Once the pandemic kind of died down in early 2021, our organization partnered with IBM to develop this solution. And ever since, IBM has been managing and operating the CRC, governed by two committees, the executive committee and the technical committee, which I'm part of. So with the committees, we drive the scope and the activities of the CRC. So it's not just governed by IBM or the port. So after 1 year of operations, there are 3 key lessons that I would like to share, which is, the first one is we understand the importance of executive and management support. So without the executive and management support, this platform basically would be non-existent. The second lessons learned is the understanding the importance of information sharing. So this platform was created for our ecosystem in LA so they could facilitate the information sharing of cyber information and cyber events. And the last key lessons learned that I would like to share is building that relationship, building that trust among the stakeholders for the participants so they could continually share that information with each other in a closed system. Thank you.
Yeah, so building trust is based on people, right? And not only on organization, as you said, without the C-suite really at Port of LA, it would have been difficult. Frans, very something that we will be discussing to our session, I think, in this afternoon on building the workforce. But building the workforce is really, from where we are today and where we need to go in 23, it's huge on cybersecurity, right?
Absolutely. And I think we have to look to organizations who have here some responsibility and aiming at a coalition. And then we are thinking about IMO, the World Bank, IAPH, and maybe also USCG, if we can join efforts in order to help those ports who could help get that helping hand, because it's the workforce is as you said, very important. It is about people, and it starts at the top, identifying this as a very relevant issue in an entity. But then they have to learn that it is not something of the IT department, but of us all, and then getting them to work in the right disciplines in order to be preventive. There is a lot of prevention in our guidelines, but I also want to mention that there is also attention for crisis management, which is different from prevention. And there also we have to help entities to learn how to be effective in such a situation.
Yeah, in the high-level roundtable with Jens, we were talking about crisis-proof requirement, right? The world that we live in right now, and especially the last weeks, as you rightly said, Jens, is different from a year ago, right? So where are we? What is the situation really of cyberspace? What are the challenges that we're facing? So you can share with the audience here.
Yeah, it's absolutely correct. The world differs totally from the world a few months ago. So also we have to look at the guidelines again, but responsibility, financing, and all the foundation of that is the same. I would like to share, we can discuss, MERS was already mentioned with the NotPetya virus, let's call it like this. Ransomware is coming up more and more. My example was also a clear ransomware attack. Sometimes it's a damage attack to disrupt something. We all have to understand, cyber is not a local issue. Attacks to energy companies had happened in Dubai, and Hamburg was influenced, and also Belgium and Netherlands ports were also influenced. And so my recommendation to the audience is, first of all, what I've already mentioned, minimum two-factor authentication. That's simple. The second thing is to have a look also to other sectors. I think the biggest mistake we can do in the maritime sector is just focus on ourselves. We have a perfect network between each other. We share knowledge in our trustful network, but I can say for the Port of Hamburg and myself, I'm also looking to the healthcare segment, for example. Not because I'm interested in hospitals, but I look at the technologies, how the hackers and the cyber attacks have been happened, to learn from that. IOCs, everybody in this round is familiar with that. Check, is there a chance to get into? And our approach is to look with the eyes of a hacker to our infrastructure, to implement predictive security systems. That means try to find the holes before hacker groups can find it. It's not just pen tests, it's avoid infection, and it's what LA has implemented. It's great and brilliant, and our model in Hamburg, and we share knowledge about architecture, structure. But the next step everybody has to go, every organization has to do, is to look permanently, at holes, missing patches, new legs coming up, and how to get to the crown jewels, how we say, not within one step. You need 10, 15 steps to get there and close that gaps. And therefore, we can share a lot of perfect tools for that. But therefore, that's not an open discussion. That's a discussion for the CIOs and the CISOs coming together.
That's a very exercise. The exercises are very important. I remember I was in 2016 in Long Beach at a meeting with USCG on this matter, and you were already doing exercise and drills. This is an important action item also of your collaboration with the private sector, nationwide, but also international-wide, right?
That's correct. So I'll go back in time to 2003, 2004 with the implementation of the ISPIS code. Same challenges that we have today in cyber were baseline challenges after the US 9/11 and after the implementation of the ISPIS code. So we would partner and build capacity with countries throughout the world. Some countries would come to us and ask for specific mitigation measures. They would want capacity building training that it would help them increase their port security in their ports and ports facilities. So same issue is arising now on the cyber front. We engage throughout the country, and in some of the facilities and the port authorities that do not have the financial capabilities, they don't have the throughput of cargo or shipping to have an advanced cyber hygiene. They reach out to the Coast Guard all the time. They're asking for that drill and exercise training. We're currently developing several mitigation methodologies that once we have them ready for implementation, we'll beta test them in the ports, working with our stakeholders in the ports. And then secondly, on the international front, taking some of those best practices and partnering with other countries to develop a joint type of risk mitigation, whether it be a tabletop exercise, whether it be something that's focused at the executive level of management down to the working level operators. And then thirdly, we have a lot of asks from countries throughout the world. How do we establish rule of law? How do we establish governance? We need assistance in developing these policies in our own country. In the past, with port security implementation, we would work with countries, with their legal, with their attorneys, with their policy people, and conduct legal workshops to build that rule of law. And so at the end of the day, it's a multi-functional approach, but it's working collaboratively with our partners throughout the world. It's working with our industry in the US. We have a simple ask from working with the Area Maritime Security Committees that simply facilities want to be notified of cyber threats. Something as simple as that with simple two-factor authentication, these simple strategies. And they reach out to us and say, how can we get that information? As we know, cyber, if it's 2 days, the event's over. You can't mitigate, you can't adequately respond. It's an immediate response. So we worked with other agencies within the US government. We're developing something as simple as an external facing website. This will have maritime focused cyber information that facilities can use to strengthen their networks, to put some type of mitigation measures in place, and more so working with their partners and the captain of the port, and with other agencies, with CISA, with DHS, with the Coast Guard, to stopgap that. The Coast Guard, we're increasing our level of our cyber protection teams, our CPTs, so that they can be involved in the ports when a threat is there, so they can hunt, they can detect that, and they can help mitigate that. So the key takeaways is that it's a collaborative effort. We need to learn internationally and domestically from everybody. It's a group effort. It isn't just the government setting policy and wanting it to be followed. We want to work and build that relationship. We want to build trust within industry, with the stakeholders, because at the end of the day, policy will follow. Policy will be there regardless, with MITSA and strengthening of our cyber requirements for US ports. But more so, it's that after action, how we work together long term to address these threats, together as a team.
Tom, you were talking about ISPS, when if we go back 21 years ago, after 9/11, that you really moved forward, also on port security at the global level along with the IMO. And Jens, you were saying that we have a massive increase of ransom attacks. We are in a ransom war, like we were at 9/11 and another war. I'd like to open the discussion about if we go back 20 years ago when you launched, along with the IMO, with other member states, the ISPS. When we studied ISPS, we said, well, what do we have to do? We are quite in the same situation. Yes, we have the guideline, friends, but if you compare, Tom, this time that you know very well, you were embarked into that journey on ISPS, and what's happened in 2004 and 2005 and where we are today, is there some similarity about what we could think to get organized?
I think yes, conceptually. So if we look back after 9/11, the threat was physical security. When you look at it's what's called Part A, the mandatory requirements of countries that are signatory to the ISPS code. It was access control. It was gates. It was scanning of cargo. It was training of your employees. It was access control of everybody in that facility. If you even touched on the IT of a facility, of a port, it was how to secure the servers, how to physically secure and make them inaccessible to those nefarious actors. Well, we fast forward now, and now we have cyber, that it isn't so much physical. It's on the Internet of Things. It's anywhere in the world that you can be hacked from. And if we had the cyber threats that we do now, I'm sure that would have been included in the original Part A of the ISPS code. I think that moving forward with what the U.S. does, we have an international port security program. We still conduct and partner with countries throughout the world that we trade with. Anybody that's signatory to the ISPIS code. We have those bilateral discussions. We have that overview. We look at port operations from a whole host of factors, physical security. The topic that comes up now, first and foremost, is cybersecurity. And so while we're working to address cyber, and if we ever have an update to the ISPIS code, which we probably all know the answer to that, we have to work collaboratively together as a country and approach the IMO as a group of countries. And from that, we can implement different strategies under the ISPIS code. So when we engage, we can talk about cyber. We can talk about the policies that advance that. Because when we look at, if you weigh a physical threat and a cyber threat, a physical threat usually can be immediately mitigated. It can be stopped. There can be a resolution in place to strengthen security. Cyber is a different animal. It's something that is long-term. We talk about ransomware. It's financial. It can shut a port down just by one act. And we all know in a lot of cases that when a port is taken offline, in some countries, cargoes deviate somewhere else. That port may never come back into operation because of the time that it's offline. So cyber is critical. And to have that as a part of the ISPIS code discussion, whether it's supplemental through circulars or with a revisit of that, that's something I think that we really need to focus on and partner to explore that.
Yeah, Tom, you were talking about the rule of law. Isn't that the time to embark into that journey with the IMO? So the IMO is moving to another step in terms of cybersecurity as a current situation forces us to move forward.
Absolutely. I think we should focalize that in ISPS not only physical security is included, but digital security as well. So you could work along two roads: the guidelines for ports and port facilities, and what has to be done in the context of ISPS. And then we are thinking, of course, about the port facility security plan, which should include cybersecurity as well. But then again, we meet the challenge of the workforce, because those who are working now in ISPS in the context of physical security, we have to learn to think in the context of digital security. So I think that's a challenge in the context of capacity building as well.
But if we look back at our operation at ports, we are a critical infrastructure and therefore a critical information infrastructure. But within that critical information infrastructure, there are some components who are more important than others. Terminal operators is a key concern, right? What is the situation in LA? I mean, part of your CRC, I mean, what is the vision on that?
So Pascal, so in the Port of LA, we treat every stakeholder that has the responsibility and the role of moving goods in and out of the port as critical. It's like a chain that is physically connected. If one of those chains broke, then obviously there's going to be some type of disruption, if not monetary effects to that organization as well. So at the port, we see the terminal operators, the shipping lines, the trucking companies, the rail, all those are critical components of the ecosystem to move the goods in and out of the Port of Los Angeles.
And Frans, going back to 2017 APMT attack, I mean, really APMT was down, so lots of things were down. One of the only way for APMT to reboot was because of the existence of the port community systems, so port base. So they had all the timestamps at that time about where is the cargo, where is the truck, where is the cargo. What is your sense of responsibility when it comes to the different systems? But we have many systems at ports, right? But terminal operating systems are one in particular important.
Yes, and the perspective there is that we have now a lot of emphasis on internal security training, but you see that a lot of entities in a port are individually using the same, sometimes the same IT system. So if that system is coming into bad weather, not only one operator is vulnerable, but others as well. So we should have a plan B for such a situation, to start with training also externally and running the cybersecurity training next to internally, also externally, and be aware that that could be a very vulnerable situation.
Jens, what is the situation in Hamburg in that context?
Yeah, it's maybe in some parts I have a different view because yeah, in many cases I have really deep insights. I would like to, you were comparing ISPS code with the actual situation. Yes, that was physical access protection. And these things are now running together. OT systems, how to control locks, flap bridges, movable assets. It's now done via internet, Internet of Things. So the hybrid attacks, coming via the net and physical damage, sabotage acts, coming together, and we have to observe everything. But my main and key finding is that the instruments of the past do absolutely zero work for the challenges of the future. That means top secret information. Yeah, I would like to handle over something to you. In former times, we had maps, top secret, red bar, hand by hand. Yeah, it's far too slow. Yeah, so we need safe and secure platforms so that we can share information with other trusted partners, that they can react as soon as possible. Because follow something in the net by law, sometimes it's not allowed, and so on. So the defending systems, that is one thing, but also the communication. And the second thing is, coming back, Maersk, you were talking about terminal operating system. Yeah, it is key. I would say energy supply, much more interesting, water supply, also to stabilize democratic systems, NATO baseline requirements, that's what I'm focusing on. There are other things which might be more important and we should also keep an eye on, but the contingency planning or recovery plannings. If you get into your office and the only thing is working is the switch of your light, there is no telephone available because telephone today is voice over IP, it's also internet. There's no email communication available, nothing works because of the internet. They crash down and encrypt your payload. You are not able to pay your staff. How to motivate them, and then the private numbers of all your staff are in the systems. How to contact them? I would say 90% of the companies are not well prepared for that situation, because the question is not if it happens to your company, it's only when. Yeah. Sometimes it will get you if you are not prepared. And these search and rescue plans, I don't know the correct term in English, but that is important, we have to look at.
So we have been talking about collaboration here. So, Tom, what's next with the IMO? I mean, the rule of law is something very important, and we don't have that ISPS landscape for cybersecurity, whatever we said. It's a reality. And when we look at, what South Africa 2 years ago were forced to declare force majeure because of cyber attack, we cannot support another force majeure because of the guidelines, but we are moving towards the engagement also of the responsibility of the management with the NIS2 directive in EU, and responsibility of the management of the company and the subcontractors. But isn't that the time to think different with the IMO? What is your view on that?
You're correct, and it's a great dialogue. So what the U.S. Coast Guard does is we have a strong connectivity with the IMO through different divisions of headquarters. Some are policy, some are attorneys. With what our organization, what we do within cyber, our cybercom, and our cyber strategy division, is the dialogue that we have in this forum, internationally, domestically, these questions they're raised all the time. They aren't new. But when you go the traditional route back to an organization, it is new. It's something that we speak of sharing of information, sharing of intelligence. Well, we all know that from a military side, from a government side, trying to change the vetting process of classified information is arduous. Sometimes it's impossible. We've been discussing that issue internally with our intelligence side, our Coast Guard intelligence, working with Department of Defense, working with US Cybercom, working with other intelligence agencies to develop something that will allow that sharing of critical information. It might not have to be secret or classified. It has to be more open source, because the threat, as we all know, is immediate. We can't wait for policy to follow, whether it's legislative policy, whether it's security policy. And that's where I think we go back to, we work collaboratively, and in a lot of instances, how we change that policy matrix with organizations like the IMO is the IMO listens to a collaborative effort between different countries. So us coming together and presenting that type of discussion will change some of those factors, and we can arrive at a better solution for that. It'll take time. I'll give one quick example. So back years ago, we wanted to make changes to physical security. So what we did is we worked with other organizations like Asia Pacific Economic Cooperative, Organization of American States, the EU, some partners there. We developed capacity building training that was risk mitigation. Once that proved successful throughout the world, then it was easier to revisit some of these changes. I think that where we're at now with the time sensitivity, that with what we're doing with discussing information sharing, working collaboratively and coming together as a group, as a world community, as a global partner for marine transportation, that's how we initially raise that. We try to come into a resolution and something that's impactful where we can make those changes.
So, I mean, if we wanted to wrap up on our discussion here, first of all, we have an emergency situation to face, really, which is increasing logarithmically as we speak. We have been talking about visibility. When your CEO asked you a question a few years back, did you have visibility on it? You said no. If we ask to our audience and colleagues from all around the world, you know, it's a poll question, would be very interesting. So that means the visibility things, and what has been done in LA is very interesting business case for us. But you have been also talking about predictive security. We have a lot to do, right? We have a lot to do. We have been talking about collaboration, and Frans, you said about coalition. We need to have a coalition of willings all together, like we're doing at Chainport's members, in cooperation with US Coast Guard and others, with the IMO and others as well, to face that situation carefully, and as we did also back 20 years ago in the IAPH, but now we move forward very fast on 23. And we have a question just in that conclusion is, how can the leading port partner further on cybersecurity? It's what you do at Chainport, it's what we do at IAPH, but we have, again, like in supply chain resilience, closing the gap. So I think collaboration with others, collaboration with regions of the world that are not super advanced on cybersecurity, it's, we'll be very pleased at Chainport, to discuss with our colleagues around the world on this. Gentlemen, really thank you for your time today. We have other meetings on cybersecurity for the next 2 days, and it was really a pleasure to have you to tackle this very, very important, critical issue at our ports. Thank you, gentlemen.